Okay, this is chapter 6, part 3. We left off last time talking about various approaches to justice, left off with speaking of utilitarian justice. Recall that that's sort of a form of justice where we're trying to get maximum benefit for the maximum number of people in society. So it's sort of an approach thinking of the overall welfare of society. The technique of cost-benefit analysis, which could even be quite quantitative and mathematical, can be used to determine if utilitarian justice is achieved. So again, it's kind of a strange approach once you get down to the details, because you're to determine if you have justice, you look to see if an action by the criminal justice system provides society with more benefits than costs. Because you might say, well, let's look at whether we should incarcerate this individual or not who's been convicted of, say, a violent crime. Well, the benefits are that, for example, this person who is violent prone will be removed from society, which should protect the community and should prevent violent crimes from happening on the street. Now, violent crimes could happen in prison, and that could be a cost. But still, there's the benefit of at least arguably greater safety in the community because the person has been incapacitated. On the negative sides, though, you could say, well, taxpayers are going to have to pay for that imprisonment, which is quite expensive. You know, prisons can cost, say, pretty easily $50,000 per year per inmate, and so that's a cost. Plus, you could say that there's the cost to the inmates' family members who will not have daily access to that individual during the time that he or she's incarcerated, et cetera, et cetera. See, so you kind of stack up the costs and the benefits, and you declare that justice is achieved if it's of greater benefit to the society than it is to a cost to society. So it's all about the welfare of society. This is sort of, in a way, this is not an individualistic type of justice, because it's looking at kind of well-being for everybody, not just the rights of the individual. So again, just a different kind of perspective. One of the purposes in this chapter is just to kind of march you through these various perspectives, and when it comes to deciding for yourselves which of these makes the most sense, well, we leave that up to you, right? That's I'm not really, it's not my position to tell you which of these types of justices is the most correct in my view. I'm just here to sort of explain, to give you the full menu, and then hopefully you think these things through and do it sort of like you'll be more educated in how you come down on these issues. Okay. Retributive justice. This is the view that criminals deserve punishment. This differs from other criminal justice goals of rehabilitation, deterrence. In a later chapter, we'll talk more about different philosophies of punishment. But this idea of justice is kind of, it's payback. It's the old-fashioned kind of punitive justice where you inflict harm on society. Well, then some kind of harm needs to be inflicted upon you to sort of equal the scales of justice. So retributive is sort of a term for retaliation, and a synonym for retaliation, for payback, evening the score, that kind of thing. The public is most likely to support retribution for deliberate, cold-blooded crimes. So, something like capital punishment could be done in the name of retribution, that you've deliberately, in a cold-blooded, heartless way, taken the life of somebody else, so you have forfeited the right to have your own life, and the state needs to take your life. That's a retribution kind of idea. And you do see that people tend to be more in favor of the tough, aggressive punishment of criminals if they see the criminals' crimes as being cold-blooded, very planned, very deliberate, very intentional. If it's, on the other hand, a crime of passion, something done spontaneously in the heat of the moment without thinking about it, then the American public is less enthusiastic about retribution for that sort of a criminal. Because again, they see in a crime of passion, they see less intentionality, less cold-bloodedness, and more just toward a mistake, towards a lapse in judgment, momentary lapse in judgment. Restorative justice. This one is like some of these other more recent types of justice. Restorative justice would kind of fit into that category because it's been emphasized in recent decades. It focuses on repairing the harm that is done by crime. So there's a focus on what harm is done, and then what can we do to repair that harm. So it's kind of about a healing process or compensation, trying to make the wound, the harm of crime go away by some sort of restoration. Restoration meaning bringing it back to how things were before the crime occurred, right? This approach attempts to involve victims, to prick the conscience of the offender, and to generate an apology and group solutions to make compensation. So it kind of takes the sin, forgiveness, redemption sort of model that you've done something bad, we can put this past us and we can heal and we can move on if you can make compensation to the victim, if you can make the victim whole, if you can do things like show penitence to feel sorry for what you've done, to regret what you've done, and to become committed and motivated to not just do this kind of thing again, and to make a positive contribution to the community as opposed to harming it. And again, involving the victims, bringing the victims in, looking for victim satisfaction. And there could be compensation where you do something for the victim or do something for the community to make up for the harm that you've inflicted through your crime. So again, it's a different kind of approach, and one that has the positive in that it sort of has a mechanism to get beyond the crime and the harm, to be able to move on through restoration, through things like forgiveness and repentance, that sort of thing. Now, let us switch topics here because we want to talk about an important legal scholar, John Rawls, leading justice scholar. He defined justice as fairness, which sounds pretty common sense to me, as fairness. So individuals are due that which is identified through a fair process. So he is talking about a fair process, that you need to have fair steps that lead to an outcome, but that outcome should be fair as well, that fairness is at the heart of justice. Seems reasonable. Now, he developed this idea. He wrote not just about criminal justice issues, but kind of what makes for a good society. What should a good government be based upon? What principles? And so he developed this interesting idea that's called the veil of ignorance. It's a thought experiment where you pretend to be ignorant about your background. So just let's imagine that you haven't been born. And so you're behind this veil of ignorance. You don't know what sort of family, what sort of community, what sort of social class, what race, what gender you were born into. And so if you wipe all that away, and so you take away your personal characteristics, well, what kind of society would you favor? Would you favor a really equal society where, if it is a roll of the dice, which family, which community, et cetera, that you are born into, if it's a complete roll of the dice, well, in that situation, what kind of society would you want? Would you want a society that was everybody's very much the same and equal, and there's very little inequality? He would say that the logical answer is that you want a just society that's fair to all, because you may very well land in a maybe not the most privileged situation. You may be born into a situation with a variety of disadvantages. So if that's the case, that there's a decent chance you can be born into bad circumstances, then you probably would want a society that gives a fair shake to everybody, even people who are born into disadvantaged circumstances. So if it's fair to everybody, then regardless of what your situation you're born into, you're going to get fairness, right? So that's a little thought experiment that he develops that ends up being sort of like in favor of universal fairness. Fairness should be there for everybody, and it shouldn't depend on what station in life you're born into. For a society to be fair to all, opportunities and treatment, but not results, must be equal. So he would say that not everybody ends up needing to be equally wealthy, or not everyone needs to end up facing the same chance of prison. That, if you commit a crime, a serious crime, you murder somebody, that's the type of person who should go to prison. If you're a law-abiding, well-behaved person who conforms yourself to the laws, well, then you obviously shouldn't face a prison sentence. And so he's not saying that everybody should receive the same results, but that the process must be fair. There should be a lack of bias. Opportunity should be fair, and then people choose their direction in life. And if they do good things, they should be rewarded for that. If they do bad things, then they should be held accountable for that. But he's talking about a fair process, fair treatment for everybody. So that way, regardless of what you're born into, you're going to get fair opportunities, fair treatment, and not face biased circumstances. So, as it applies to the criminal justice system, Rawls' veil of ignorance would lead to blind justice, and that's a traditional symbol, metaphor of the American criminal justice system, is Lady Justice with a blindfold on, that doesn't judge you by how you look or what your social characteristics are or what situation you're born into, what family you come from, but regardless, that since you're an American citizen, you should get equal justice, blind justice, and you shouldn't get favorable treatment for any reason. So Rawls is advocating for that. Now, discretion, we've talked about this term before. It's connected to the issue of distributive justice, how punishments get passed out to individuals in society. Criminal justice officials can use discretion to achieve more or less justice. So some of what makes the system a just one or not is, do the professionals working in the criminal justice system, do they operate in a just, fair way? Are they treating everybody the same in the sense of, color blindness, justice blindness, those kinds, various types of blindness, gender blindness, that kind of thing, where you receive the same treatment regardless of who you are. And that's the ideal, and that's the goal, which sometimes we fall short of. But discretion is an important part of this, because we don't have policies for every single situation, how a police officer should handle every single situation, or how a judge should handle every single case. Every case is unique and different. So you need to have professionals that use their power, their authority, in just ways. So some of this depends on the people, the quality of the people who have the authority to make decisions. So there's a tension between the interests of the individual and the interests of the community. The goal is to find the right balance. So, of course, from my own position, my own goal and interest is that I don't want to be harassed by the criminal justice system. I don't want to be bothered by the criminal justice system. I don't want to be punished by the criminal justice system. That's my desire, my interest. All of us want to be sort of left alone by the criminal justice system. But if I'm committing crimes, if I'm robbing and stealing and burglarizing and assaulting, well, it's in the community's interest to try to stop me. So the community's interests and mine diverge in that situation. But you don't even have to make it that extreme. You could say, listen, it's inconvenient. It's against my interest to get stopped, to have my car stopped, and to get pulled over, or to some officer to come up to me on the street and ask me questions. That's, bothersome to me. That's annoying. I don't want that. But that's the point I'm making, is that what I want and what may be good for me may be in conflict with what's good for the community. Maybe the community needs to have people questioned, needs to have certain people stopped for certain behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a tension there, which we have to find. We're always trying to find the right balance of harmonizing, or at least getting a compromise between individual rights, individual desires and interests, and the interests, the welfare of the community. Okay, the authors present a 4-cell typology on how the system addresses the needs of the individual and the community. So I won't take time to walk through all 4 of these cells. Let's take the first couple that perhaps are the most essential to give us an idea, and you folks can, on your own time, make sure and finish out that full typology. The mechanical model, this is the model that focuses on neither the needs of the individual nor the needs of the community. The goal is to rigidly and rapidly follow laws without discretion and without consideration of the outcomes they produce. So this is one thing you tend to get with any bureaucracy. You can think of a bureaucracy as sort of being like a machine. And so sometimes bureaucracies can lack humanity, can lack a soul, and can be just paperwork, and just like we see here on the next page, that it can be minimal effort and just mechanized, just automated like a robot. And so you're not going to get very good justice if everybody's operating as a robot in the system. The intent is simply to provide order, to focus on, the focus is going to be on going by the book. So follow the rules, just crank through those people who've been brought into the criminal justice system. Sticking rigidly to the process is more important than outcomes. So again, this is sort of a minimal effort, robotic sort of system. This is sometimes referred to as assembly line justice because the focus is on moving cases through as much as possible. We've got too many cases. We're always backed up. We just got to churn through those and get through them. And so sometimes we fall short of justice because we're not putting enough effort, enough professionalism, enough energy into the processing of these cases. The needs of both the community and the individual are given a low priority. So that doesn't sound like a very idealistic model. The next model is the authoritarian model. It focuses on the needs of the society. Here, the society is everything, and the society is what's valuable. And the individual doesn't really matter. The individual, if the individual gets trampled on, gets ruined, destroyed, harmed, the individual doesn't matter. And it's the group, it's the herd, it's the society that matters. And that's really a pretty traditional cultural emphasis in many societies throughout history. Have tended to not consider individuals to be very important. If you have a society with 1 million people, the people who run that society tend to think about the people at the top, or they think about society as a whole. But one individual out of 1 million, they're like, doesn't make that much of a difference one way or the other. So that's a pretty traditional idea, and actually the ideal embedded in the United States system is that the individual matters, that each person up against the state, up against the herd, up against the group matters. Each life has value. And that is something that you don't see in every society. In authoritarian societies, you tend to see a devaluation of the individual. Outcomes are important. So, hey, we need a safe society. We need peaceful streets, orderly people, and troublemakers. We need to get them off the streets and get them locked up. We need peace and order. And if you lock up innocent people, well, that's just the sacrifice of having an orderly society. So again, individuals don't matter so much. There are 3 characteristics that you tend to see with authoritarianism. Authoritarian submission, which is a high degree of obedience to an acceptance of dominance by authorities. So it's a real submissiveness, obedience, and a lack of questioning or disagreeing with authority. So it's just a complete 100% submissiveness towards the powers that be. Authoritarian aggression, second characteristic here, is that you tend to see authorities tend to be aggressive towards citizens and individuals, disrespect their rights, will violate human rights, will do unfair things like false imprisonment, arresting you, locking you up for no legal reason, invading your privacy, invading your various individual rights without any concern for you. And so it's forcefulness. You tend to get repression. You tend to get violence. You tend to get intimidation and fear, that you instill fear in citizens so that they don't consider challenging or questioning the way you do things. And number 3, conventionalism, which is a high degree of general conformity. So again, in this sort of society that's characterized by fear, respect for power and authority, and you tend to get everybody going along with it, and you don't get people speaking out against it or disagreeing or wanting to go another way. You don't get a lot of debate and agreement. Everybody seems to feel the same about things. So you get a high degree of conventionalism with authoritarian type of model. With this model, there's little tolerance for disagreement, and those who disagree are seen as deviant or dangerous. So there's also low tolerance and a quickness to see anybody who's going a different way and who disagrees as being not just different or having a different opinion, but as someone who's a threat, as someone who's a threat to the system, who's deviant, who's potentially dangerous, and so therefore maybe needing to be shut down with authoritarian methods, with intimidation, with force, whatever it takes to neutralize that perceived threat. So again, all these things tend to go together in an authoritarian model. Reaching social goals is considered to be much more important than the needs of individual offenders. So again, there's not concern about the welfare or the needs or the rights of the offenders. With an authoritarian model, the goal is order, conformity, lack of disruptive behavior. And so that tends to be the priority in this authoritarian model. Research indicates that you sometimes will see this tendency among criminal justice employees. Now, we certainly don't want to stereotype, but we just want to say that it is a tendency that you sometimes see with people who work in the criminal justice system. So you probably need to sort of ask yourself these sorts of questions if you do go in the criminal justice system is, do I have a little bit of these tendencies which maybe are not best for what America values, where, I'm a little bit too much differential to authority? Do I not question things enough? Do I not have my own mind and my own opinion about things? Am I all about conformity and deferring to authority? And again, this is sort of like a pure sort of model. We're not saying that that authority is a bad thing or that should be opposed all the time or any of that. We're just saying that this is sort of an extreme version where you get unhealthy levels of conformity, of deference to authority, to aggressiveness by authorities, and violations of human rights and that kind of thing. So this is something that you sometimes see this being an issue among some criminal justice employees. Now, finally, we'll finish with this one and skip the last one. I'm running long already. The compassionate model focuses on the needs of the offenders and tends to put as a lower priority, is not very concerned with the welfare, the safety of the streets or the safety of the community. So it places a high emphasis on offenders' needs rather than society's needs. So it's all about the focus of concern is not on the victims. It's not on the well-being of the community overall. It's concerned with individual rights, with offenders' rights, offenders' needs, and their welfare, and the focus is on them. So here you get a two-tiered approach. Prevention efforts are made with at-risk children. So there's prevention efforts. There's a concern with people who in the future might get in trouble with the law, who might be arrested and incarcerated. And so an emphasis on prevention and also a rehabilitation approach. So once you have been convicted of a crime and have been once you've been brought into the criminal justice system, the compassionate model is concerned about trying to maximize your welfare. And if you need to be sort of helped get back on your feet or be put in a positive direction, a more law-abiding direction, that should be prioritized. We should be helping, rehabilitating people and helping them get straightened out, as opposed to just punishing or only be concerned about safe streets and that kind of thing. So it's a helping sort of model. It's more of I guess you think of it more as like a social work model as opposed to a criminal justice punishment sort of model. Criminal justice agencies with this kind of approach will partner with schools, with psychologists, with social workers, various agencies, and again, with the focus being, let's help these offenders. What do they need to be able to have good, productive lives? That kind of thing, addressing offenders' needs, and particularly those needs that maybe are getting them into trouble. So if the person's a drug addict and the drug addiction drives them to commit crimes, to rob and burglarize homes, to get money to pay for their addiction, well, this type of approach would say, well, we need to work on this person's drug abuse and their addiction. So if we fix that problem, we address that need, then maybe the crime will go away, right? If you target those things that are causing the criminal behavior. Laws might be reformed with the interest of offenders in mind. Law violations might be seen as criminal justice failures. So again, the focus here is on the needs, the welfare of the accused, the defendants, and not only their needs, but their rights too, that preserving and making sure that their rights are protected. Again, that's the priority. The priority is not the welfare of the community as a whole. Now, finally, the participatory model, I said I was going to skip that one. Just realize that one's connected to what we talked about before, the kind of discourse form of justice where you need to have dialogue, democracy, participation, compromise, understanding to be able to come up with the best solutions. But I'll leave the details for you guys to go over on your own.